Jeremy from Jeremy.net. I am a comic book artist, writer, creator, self-publisher, and I share my creative process here with you online. If you would like to get additional bonus live streams twice a month, if you would like to get access to our Patreon exclusive Discord server where we share artwork, give each other feedback, talk about process. If you would like to be able to read my comic books free online digitally, you can sign up for my Patreon. Become a Patreon subscriber at patreon.com/Jeremy. That's patreon.com/GERIMI. For as little as $2 a month, you can become a member and get access to all of that and more. If you would like to get a free digital sketchbook, get work in progress animated gifts delivered right to your inbox, get blog posts about what I'm reading, watching, what's inspiring me creatively, you can sign up for my newsletter, my free monthly newsletter at newsletter.jeremy.net. And if you'd like to purchase physical copies of my comic books, or if you read digitally on Comixology or Kindle, you can go to amazon.jeremy.net. You can purchase copies of my books like my first graphic novel, Eye of the Gods. It's a standalone psychological thriller about a man cursed with visions he cannot control. You can also pick up my most recent project, Morning Star. It tells the story of Lucifer's fall from heaven as a Western. Volume 1 contains issues 1 through 4. Volume 2 contains the conclusion of the series, issues 5 through 8. Both volumes have extensive back matter, character designs, character sketches, script excerpts, tons of stuff. Basically, I show you how I put together the entire comic book. You can get all of that at amazon.jeremy.net. And for all of these, there are links in the description for the video, except if you're watching on Twitch, in which case there's links to all of these in the bio of my page. Okay. So, what am I up to? What am I up to? All right, so when last we left, I was at some various stage of process of working on this piece, this most recent in my my Gorgon series, my most recent Medusa piece. So, as you guys know, I love thumbnails. You saw me doing extensive thumbnails of, not extensive thumbnails, but a few different thumbnails, working out the process for this. So in between the last time we spoke and now, I thought, all right, I've done my thumbnails. If I've learned nothing from other pieces I've done, it's that I should do value studies as well. So I started with one value study. It's just me just looking at it, dark character, slightly lighter character on a light background ground. I went through and I used the color drop in Procreate to just basically like eye dropping different color versions to just see what values I liked. See Byron's in the chat. Hey all, hey Byron, how you doing, man? Thanks for dropping in. So I started with this version, and I thought, I'd like to see a couple other versions side by side. So I shrunk this version down and brought up 4 of them. And I tried to do kind of like a soft lighting on top of them. And I changed the values on the figures a little bit, but then kind of just doing it kind of like as if there's a soft glow, like they're lit from above, similar to the Moonlight version of this piece. And I looked at these, and none of them really spoke to me. So what did I do? I've got a whole grid now of thumbnails. And the original thumbnails I did are the 4 that are in the upper left quadrant of this page. And then I've just sort of been working my way around. So I kind of worked around to the right side. I worked around to some on the bottom. And some of these are ones that I'm relatively happy with. Some of these are ones like, I would say the bottom left quadrant, I haven't really done anything with. So I'm probably going to work on some of these today. This quadrant, some I think are workable. Some I just tried different things and I'm like, these aren't working at all. These are just places for me to experiment. And this is, again, one of those things that I feel like other artists don't share enough, which is the ugly phase of an illustration, the phase when you're working out stuff and figuring stuff out. And I try not to do that ugly phase on the final piece. I try to do all of the ugly work in value studies and thumbnails. But sometimes that means doing an extensive number of thumbnails. So I'm just going to put a selection on here just so that as I'm working, I won't paint in the gutters, the space in between the individual images. See what happens if I turn that off. I mean, I don't even know where to start with this one right here that I'm looking at. Like this just to me is just, I don't even know what I was trying to get at with this, except maybe just trying to do hard edge shadows. Maybe almost like a darker version of what I did up here, where I really tried to say, all right, what if I just blew everything out to high contrast and only had the whatever edge of a form was facing shadow, if I only had that visible. So Salazar, Art Nation, hey Frank, how you doing, man? He says, so you have the line art completed and the value and work out the values. Well, that's kind of half right. I have the line art laid out. So, you know, that what I was flipping through earlier, if I turn these off. So this is my sketch, my layout sketch. But even this sketch, the line art isn't particularly tight. It's very, very loose. So the reason why I'm doing my value studies before digitally inking this piece is because what I've discovered is that a lot of times when I would go to ink it, and then I would go in to start laying in my tones, and I would find that the values that gave me the best composition didn't necessarily agree with the way that I inked it. You know, what I made the underside of the form, you know, you'll make forms that are facing away from the light. You'll make the underside line of them a little bit thicker. The lines that are closest to the light, you'll make those lines lighter, thinner. I would find that I didn't necessarily ink it in a way that complemented the values that I wanted on the piece. And that's why I'm doing a rough sketch, a layout sketch, then doing value studies. And then when I'm done with the value studies, then I'm going to ink it. And that's a lot of back and forth. It's a lot of shoe leather. And I think a lot of people may not necessarily. I see Amar's in the chat. How you doing, man? I know a lot of people eager to just start working on whatever they're working on and get into a piece. They may not like the idea of doing the amount of shoe leather. And I'm just using that term for process work that isn't the beautiful, sexy lines and or the painting and the coloring. Shoe leather is all of the visual work that's not that. Working out composition, working out values. But I have found that in the past, when I don't do that, it ends up biting me in the ass. So I thought, all right, well, let's try it here. So the main thing is I've been away from this piece for a day or two because I was working on some figure studies for my class, the figure drawing class I take. So mentally, I don't want to say I'm checked out, but I need to sort of reboot and get back up to speed to where I left off on this piece. And the first thing I'm trying to do is just get in here and establish some simple. A lot of times, I think the one thing I found that's consistent is if I start with the sheet that's on top of them and say, all right, what's a value that's slightly lighter than the sheet, and paint highlights onto it. Or in case if the sheet is super light, like in case of the one over here to the right, starting with what's a value that's slightly darker than that, and start by just painting in the sheets around them. I don't know why. That seems to give me a good starting point for working out my values. And from there, the real challenge is just getting trying not to get too complicated with these values, because it's very easy to get sucked into the idea of making all of these cool and interesting shapes on here on the canvas and not really drawing lines that say anything. So I'm trying to force myself to think in large compositional masses. And to a certain degree, I kind of want to forget. It's an interesting balance, this phase of uh, of working on a piece, because I almost want to forget that it's a study for a larger piece. And in some ways, it's like I need to keep flipping a switch in my mind. I need to turn on my analytical part of my brain and then turn it off again. Because to a certain degree, what is the most helpful for me is to just forget the end goal and just draw until I have something that I'm like, oh, this is good or this is interesting. I mean, sometimes I'll be drawing and I'll end up like something over here on the right where I don't even know what this is. I feel like I want to erase the tones that are on this one and try again. So I'm not even sure like what the hell that's supposed to be. But in the meantime, for this, the goal I think is just to find simple contrasts that complement the not necessarily complement, but that express the values, that express the form, that very subtly express detail without drawing too much detail. I want to find simple values that will basically help really block in all of the detail that I need for the figure. And then when I'm done, the hope is look at all of those and say, well, which one is the most appealing? So in a sense, it's kind of like I'm doing mindless rendering. And then when I'm done, I step back and I look at them and said, okay, out of all this mindless rendering, what looks good? What feels good? What's making this piece better? This one's a little bit different for some of the others because for most of the studies, I've done it where the statue is like marble and the Medusa, the Gorgon, is dark skinned. And this one, I made the statue a little bit darker. I think there's one or two others like that in this series. And these changes don't necessarily mean, oh, this is the final one I'm going to go with. It may well be that, much like I did a candlelight and moonlight version of the previous one, I may do this and say, all right, I may do one where she's darker and one where she's lighter. And it's always a battle for me to keep these simplified. Hmm, pardon me. This is also very different from the way that I tend to think compositionally, because thinking in these flat shapes, normally I'm a very constructive illustrator. I think in trying to sculpt three-dimensional volumes. And a lot of the times in the past when I've done value studies, even those, I would do them on top of the line art. But I think to a certain degree, forcing myself to do these value studies without line art, I think it's a positive thing, but it's a positive thing that is stepping outside of my comfort zone. And stepping outside of your comfort zone is a good thing. It's a necessary thing. Because if you always do what's comfortable to you, you're going to end up with the same stale results all the time. It's interesting because I still have not completely figured out the lighting, whether the light is coming from. If I switch to white for a second, I haven't figured out whether the light is coming from directly above the figures looking down, like your mind's eye, or whether the light is shining down from above. It's one of the things that I'd hoped doing value studies would help me resolve is the lighting. In fact, maybe that's what I should do with one of these last two ones is expressly, or maybe that's what I should do with this ugly ass one over here on the right, is erase those values and come in and specifically do directional lighting. Because on these, I'm thinking more about the forms and it's still kind of an ambient light. Yeah, there's a couple in here that I'm relatively happy with. But my goal was my intention in doing this grid of value studies was to finish it and then post it all over the internets and just ask for people's opinions in terms of which ones they liked and then maybe select one or two. Well, no, it's definitely one, but maybe do two different versions based on on feedback, because I have this weird thing that I have found. Anytime I put up a poll for and ask people for their input on a piece. Normally, you figure, well, there's going to be one or two that are like overwhelmingly the dominant piece, and I find invariably I get like a split audience, and it tends to be split in a way where there's like one third like one third like another, and another third like the other one, and then there's a few stragglers. Um, it's odd to me that whenever I think there's going to be like one or two clear cut favorites, it always ends up being like split in a different way than I had imagined. Honestly, I think the ones that'll probably get the most attention or support will be the ones that are on white sheets, just because of the level of contrast in the figures. And while I definitely believe that contrast is hugely important in a piece, I think I compose a lot of things with kind of a murkier, grayer value scale. In my mind, I see a lot of things that are kind of gray, with just little hints of detail and contrast within them. I keep zooming out and looking and comparing the whole series of what I've done and what I've tried versus the one that I'm working on at the moment. And just ask myself, well, am I repeating myself? Am I doing anything new here? Is there anything interesting or different that I'm pulling out of the piece? Which is funny because it's almost like it silly that I am taking the time to do all of these different versions of a single piece, and then I'm trying to say, well, wait, am I make sure I'm not repeating myself? The whole exercise is me repeating myself. So it's funny that that's a concern for me. But also, when I'm doing these very light gray studies, where I'm just kind of adding light and shadow on top of it, it reminds me. Uh, it reminds me of studies similar. Well, here. Reminds me of studies similar to doing a value study of this guy. It's Michelangelo's David. I've got a small bust of his head. And I don't do enough of these cast study drawings. And these are just good for learning how to turn form. I don't know if Negro Frazetta is going to see this, but I know that for him, rendering was a big concern. And I think that having one of these and just doing studies from it with different lightings is a great way to study form. It's like you can see how the light changes when you do this versus having him lit in the exact same pose but from the opposite side. So these things are all very useful and handy. And doing what I'm doing now reminds me of those studies. Oh, let's see. Salazar Art Nation says that's a cool bust. I need to get some. Yeah, your local art store will have usually a pretty good selection of busts to pull from. I've also bought a set on Amazon that has smaller busts, but they come in like a set of I think I got like 15 or 18 of them. The only thing that kind of sucks is that they're not particularly diverse. Like they're all kind of very similar head, face, European features. It'd be really nice to get a set of busts that were a bit more diverse. But hell, I can do self-portraits if I really want that. I mean, what you want the old masters to do? That's what they had to work with. All right. So for all of these, something that I'm doing is I've color dropped all of these different values based on the original sketch that I did. So I've color dropped in different, background darknesses, different values for the figures. And what I'm trying to do when I go in here and paint like the fabric or painting the values on the figure, I'm trying to pick a value that's just one right next to the value that is the base color. For instance, I'm picking this color, I'm scribbling on here. Okay, so this is a little bit darker. That might be darker than I want. Let's see. All right, so this light blue should be the base value of this figure. Okay, so I don't need that light blue. I do want the value just next to it. So this is 10% darker. And the idea is that as much as I really do love contrast, I'm trying to keep the figures within a certain value range of their own. So it's like I don't want the darks, the shadows on the Medusa to get so dark that her shadows are as dark as the shadows on the statue. I want the statue's shadows to be darker than her shadows. Now I did the kind of the opposite with the sheets, where the sheets are actually lighter. But even in looking at this, I'm wondering if I should go in and paint those out and then make the sheets go to a darker value. Let's see. I see James is in the chat. He says, hope you're doing well. He says that contrast. Oh yeah, Amar says, or better yet, what they chose to work with based on the world they lived in terms of talking about the old masters and the busts that they made or the sculptures that they made. Yeah, they were just painting and drawing what was around them. They weren't necessarily thinking about trying to depict people from other worlds or other nations, that sort of thing. They're just making what's around them. But yeah, I'm even wondering, like, as I was painting this, I'm looking and I feel like the sheets stand out more than they should. So I either need to paint those down darker, I either need to make the highlights darker or reverse it so that that base color I have there is the base color of the sheets and then paint shadow into it. I don't know. I don't know. I always keep checking to make sure I'm on the right layer. For all of this rendering that I have going on here, all of these little rendering experiments, let me scoot this over to the right a little bit. All these rendering experiments are on another layer. So underneath is a base layer that just has simple flat colors. So all of these are just simple flats that I've worked on. And then it's these layers on top where I'm doing all the experimentation. Let's see here. And I even experimented with different ways in which, oh wait, that's not the piece I was working on. Oh no, it is the piece I was working on. I even experimented with the way I'm rendering this because on some of these, like up here, I've painted just black and on a low opacity and built up tones. In fact, that's what I think most of these are, is just black with low opacity or white on low opacity. Whereas I switched when I moved down to this quadrant and decided to do flat color at 100% opacity. Um, and I don't think that one is better than the other. It's more of I just wanted to see if changing my approach in terms of building up values versus selecting values would give me more interesting color choices. And I feel like the selecting of specific values instead of just building it up gives me more distinct. The decisions are clearer. You know, it doesn't look like I'm fumbling as much. Even if it's not the right color value, it still feels like it's making a distinction. It's making a decision. Salazar Art Nation says, so no bald Hispanic sculptures from Michelangelo? Unfortunately, no. Well, you know what there might be? I'm sure he probably did a sculpture of a friar somewhere on the side of a statue. Let's see here. James says, I like old film noir movies because of how they're lit in contrast. He says, yeah, sometimes you end up with a lot of layers, so you got to stay organized. Yes, very much challenging to. It's easier. It's easy once you get going and just throwing one layer on top and another layer on top. It's very easy to just end up with like you go through like, oh, there's 100 different layers, and you're hunting and pecking to figure out what layer what is on. So I at least make layer groups. I'm not at the point where when I'm working in Photoshop, I tend to name all of my layers, but just the fact that typing takes a little bit longer on the iPad, I more often than not, I don't really go into the point of naming all of my layers. I'll do that when I'm doing a finished piece, but in the thumbnail stage, not so much. Like I can tell you, I did my layout sketch is still inside of this, but when I go to do my final, I'm probably going to duplicate this entire file. I'm going to delete everything except for the one thumb value study that I'm going to keep and that layout sketch. Let's see here. And let's see. Salazar Art Nation says, by the way, Jeremy, your Morningstar digital sketchbook inspired me to make my own. Since it's not as detailed as yours, mostly I just have rough thumbnails and pencils. So I just finished making the PDF. He also says, hey to James. Well, you know what? I am glad to hear that. I think that I mean, the whole reason why I made the sketchbook is because I personally love to see other creatives process. I love to see their work and how they put pieces together. And you know, I thought it would be like an interesting treat to have for people signing up for my newsletter. For those who don't know, what the digital sketchbook is when you sign up for my newsletter, it has a PDF that has the first 3 issues of Morningstar, and except they're not the full finished issues. They are my layouts with text on top of them. So it's a chance for you to kind of see what the page looks like before I start inking, because I go straight from from my rough sketches to inks. I don't do really a tight pencil phase because I am a loose artist. So there really isn't a point to me tightening up my pencils. So it's a sketchbook, and it's one of those things where you can still read the story, but it gives you a chance to get a look kind of at the behind the scenes. Originally, I started doing that so that in the months in between when I had a new comic book issue finished, if I had a convention, there were a lot of people who were like, well, when's the next issue of Morningstar coming? What's going on? I can't wait to see it. It gave me an opportunity to have something to sell to diehard fans that really wanted to see what was going on and didn't mind the spoilers. And then there were some people who really didn't even read the series, but they just liked seeing rough pencils. So they would just buy that the same way you would buy a sketchbook from any comic creator at a convention. They just liked seeing the rough pencils. And I'm like, hey, you know what? That is cool too. So that's what that's the digital sketchbook that you get when you sign up for my newsletter. It's the first 3 issues of Morningstar in rough pencil form. Let's see here. Amar says, I use layer groups all the time in CSP, and when I use Photoshop, says I also name my layers most times. Also, Procreate added the page assist feature now. Yeah, that is true. I did see that feature where you can organize your files in pages. I haven't used it only because I don't think that feature was added until I was pretty much done with Morningstar anyway. So I'm definitely going to use that when I do my my next series. Let's see here. James says, this reminds me of when I took a concept art class and experimented with colors and ideas. Yeah, I'm really trying to take a lot from things I see in educational books. Like I have a lot of the design studio, not a lot, but I have a few of the design studio press books where Scott Robertson publishes a lot of, and a lot of other educators that he knows, a lot of art center instructors publish, their educational books, and they get into the process of iteration. And iteration is something that when you're making comics, you don't see a lot of, only because you've got to work so quickly that you're just kind of blowing through pages. But even with that, thumbnails, you do your iteration quickly, but you'll do a bunch of different sketches to try and figure out what that final piece is supposed to be. I mean, my larger hope is that I'm not always going to make this many thumbnails for every single thing that I do. I feel like I'm still training my own personal internal aesthetic. Kind of like I'm training my own algorithm inside in terms of what looks good, what works for me, what gives me the results that I want. And I feel like going through this period where I'm thumbnailing the hell out of everything will hopefully get me to a point sooner where I will just know instinctually what it is that I want and how I want to get it. And I'll be able to reach those things quicker. That's too dark. I'm just now bringing down the values on this. Okay, so what I need is a value that is right in between these. And the easiest way to do that is to take this and drop the opacity. Now I can just sort of tone this down a bit. So I'm using the same color that is the base color underneath. And I'm just using it to knock back these values. You know what? When I said it's at 50%, I just sort of put it in the middle of the slider. These sliders are not precise in that way. Like as you get closer to the bottom, the numbers don't go down as quickly. So towards the lower end, you might think that you're like close to like 5%, and it turns out you're really at like a 15 or something. Let's see here. Amar says this was an easy add. The program does animation. Says I'm sure this was added because so many people are using it for concept and comic book work. Yeah, very, very likely. I mean, when I looked at it and I saw they had that feature there, I didn't get super excited because for the most part, I do my lettering separately and I do kind of compile my pages in. I letter them in Affinity Designer and then compile them. Like I put together the actual final PDF in Affinity Publisher. So for me, the idea, and maybe I need to start lettering in Affinity Publisher, but I feel like Designer has all of the features. Like Designer is super close to Adobe Illustrator. That's kind of, it's an Adobe Illustrator competitor. And I feel like having that that flexibility in terms of altering my lettering, customizing my sound effects, that's probably the best place for me to be able to do all of that. All right, this is darker than I wanted. Let's bring this up. You know, I thought to myself, I could just go in and color drop, or use the eyedropper and pick this slightly darker gray that's in between the two that I'm using. But then I would have the problem of it painting over the edges of these forms that I've already drawn in here. Whereas using the exact same color as the background is actually very convenient. I don't need that right now. I'm trying to get rid of this. There we go. All right. Let's see here. Yeah, I think that this one, I pushed the sheets back a little bit so they're not fighting so much with the figure. Let's see here. Amar says, you know, you can access the in Publisher features of Designer and Photo in the same program. You know what? Very true. And that's one of the reasons why I was saying that I've considered just switching over and doing it all in Publisher. But if for any reason I ever needed to share those files with somebody, Affinity Designer files I think they seem to transfer over to Illustrator okay. I don't know how well Publisher would open in InDesign and how well those features would be readable by InDesign. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. Like I'm always trying to think about not the current platform I'm using, but how it's going to export in terms of later future stuff. And that's one of the arguments for just staying within the Adobe ecosystem, but eh. But actually, that is one of the things that the Affinity Suite is better about than Photoshop. In that sense that you can access all of the features of a given software at one time instead of just only being able to access them. Like having the point being is that with Photoshop, there are some features where Photoshop overlaps with Illustrator, Illustrator overlaps with InDesign, so on and so forth. And like I know Illustrator has a thing where if you double click on you can edit an original and have a PSD that's nested, open in Photoshop and edit it there and then close it. And you can open a smart object that's vector based and it'll open in Illustrator. Whereas Affinity seems much more seamless in that if you're using one and you just start switching to the vector features, you can kind of, it basically feels like it feels like if you're using Affinity Photo, the vector version, Affinity Designer, just kind of opens inside of that. And that's true with Publisher and the other one. So that's one of those things that I think is a little bit more interesting. So the question I'm asking myself now is about the lighting. And I want to know whether I want to play with that with this version, because what I want to do is I want to have kind of a one-to-one comparison. Let's see. Let's try this. First off, I absolutely hate this one that's over here, so I'm just gonna erase this one completely, or at least erase the renders. So this is gonna seem kind of like redundant and a little bit silly, but what I'm going to do is I'm gonna copy the tones of this one in this quadrant over to this piece. I'm basically going to flip-flop the tones. And the reason why I'm going to flip-flop the tones is because I want to have, or actually, no, I think what I really want to do is I want to copy these tones over to the one here on the right, and I'm going to copy the tones of this one. So that I'm going to have two that are exactly the same side by side, and I can try and see how this lighting looks, looking straight forward versus above. So let's see here. We go back down to this layer. It's interesting that, okay, I guess it did. It's off. All right, that. Nope, that's a little too much. A little darker. So challenge here is that these are the base colors I started with were a little too close. So every time I try to change the colors on the Gorgon, I'm also changing the colors on the statue. I know I could just magic wand or use Procreate's equivalent of the magic wand. But their magic wand is not as predictable as Adobe's magic wand. For as much as I love Procreate, it is not perfect. Oh, I had more to finish to that thought. I just got caught up in the drawing here. Yeah, so the idea is that because the Procreate magic wand is not as good as Adobe's, I feel like I would waste more time trying to get the results that I want and selecting and reselecting rather than just go ahead and just I drop it and then paint over areas that need a little bit of refinement. So let's see here. Salazar Art Nation says, when is the Sexy Medusa coloring book coming out? And he says, hey to Amar. He says, magic wands or sorcery? I expected better from you. Yo, man, I'm a straight up dark wizard. I'm living in the darkness. Call me what he who shall not be named. J.K. Rowling ain't got nothing on me. That would be well, I guess that's kind of what they did with that Netflix movie with Will Smith, Bright. I was gonna say Training Day with Magic, but I think that that's basically what that movie was. I personally never saw it, and that's not out of any dislike for it. It's just we live in a world with too much goddamn media. Says the man who is in the process of creating media. I think that it's great for people who are consumers and just lay back and enjoy and appreciate the things creative people make. But for the creators themselves, of which I include myself, it's not necessarily about the competition because not every piece of art is going to be made for every audience. But my inability to stay up with this show and that show and this movie, it's just, I mean, they're just too much. I can't keep up. I also wanted to see that Jamie Foxx Netflix movie, Project Superpower, which people gave it okay reviews. I heard them say, it was good, it was entertaining. Not that it was the best thing in the world, not that it was the worst. I didn't hear. Whoops, a little station I've got holding this supposedly stably. It just slipped on me a little bit. That's what I get for resting too much weight on the tablet. But I've also learned not to take other people's opinions too seriously, because I mean, for a long time, I heard a lot of people kind of trashing the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movies, and in preparation for Spider-Man No Way Home, I finally sat down and watched the Andrew Garfield movies, and I watched them before seeing No Way Home, and I'm like, these are amazing. I was like, why did people not like these movies? I mean, to be honest, as great as Tom Holland is, and I'm glad Tom Holland continues to make Spider-Man movies, I was a little bit pissed that we didn't get at least one. I mean, it was nice to see Andrew Garfield in this one, but it's kind of like, I feel like there's room for an Andrew Garfield Spider-Man at the same time. Ah. Frank laughed at Dark Jeremy. Let's see here. Amar says, I mostly use it for doodling and sketching, a few paintings, nothing serious. He says, I stick to the desktop for that, so I don't have to worry about size or space demands. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, for me, the tablet has just, it's not necessarily even about, I prefer the tablet to working on the desktop. I've never enjoyed drawing on the tablet. Even when at my day job, I've got a large Cintiq that I can work from. The feeling of drawing with the Wacom stylus, those fat markery feeling things, just doesn't feel as nice in my hand as an Apple Pencil. And once I got one of these, I mean, whether you're using this or using a Surface Pro, you know, this feels right to me. So I've just yeah, I've been a fan of it ever since. Let's see. Salazar Art Nation says, I never saw Bright, but I saw Disney's Onward recently and it wasn't bad. Said I wasn't sure how it felt about a fantasy set in modern times, but I really enjoyed it. You know, that's another one that slipped by me. And I forget who the stars are, but it looked like it was a good cast. I don't know. I like the idea of modern day world with like orcs and goblins and creatures walking around. Let's see here. Amar says, I have not seen any of the Tom Holland Spider-Man movies. I highly recommend them. They are fantastic. I feel like, here's the thing. I feel like what No Way Home did is it ended the conversation. Some people, okay, this is personal opinion. This is not me stating a fact. My personal opinion, the way I viewed No Way Home, is it ended the argument of the whole who's the best Spider-Man, who's the best Batman, who's the best James Bond. They took all three of the live action. Well, they didn't get the old guy from the 70s Spider-Man, which actually that would have been a deep cut if they had gotten him in. But you know, they had Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, and Tom Holland all in a movie together. And what it showed you is that all of them were great and are great as Spider-Man. And at first, I was kind of like, I don't even care about Tobey Maguire Spider-Man. Like, it felt like the original Spider-Man movies almost seemed corny to me now in comparison to how they've kind of evolved to the modern space storytelling. And then it was kind of like, oh my God, it's kind of like Spider-Man has grown into like a little bit of an Uncle Ben. And it reminds you, like, you're happy. I didn't realize I would be as happy to see him as Spider-Man again as I was. But it made it so that it wasn't about which one's the best. It's about they were all great. They're all great. And it's great to see them together. It's great to see them interact. And the fact that you could see a world, like I could see a world where every couple of years we check in with Tobey Maguire. And then every couple of years we check in with Andrew Garfield. Like I could see that happening. Like they all work together. And this whole thing of there having to be a best version of something or only one actor can play this role. It's kind of like the Doctor Who thing where you've got multiple doctors and then they've got the specials every once in a while where they've got multiple doctors come back. I think, you know, they're borrowing a little bit from Doctor Who and it works. Um, so Frank says, yeah, poor Andrew. A third Spider-Man would have been great. I saw the first movie after No Way Home, went saw part two. Now I want more. Yeah, that's the thing. After the second Andrew Garfield movie, that's the thing. I'm not going to tell you how it ends, but the way it ends, desperate. It's not that it ends on a cliffhanger per se. There's a little bit of a cliffhanger, but it definitely can end the way like it ends, but it ends leaving you wanting to see what the next phase of that character's journey is. It's almost like in the same way that all right, there's no way to talk about without saying spoilers. But the point is that in No Way Home, Peter Parker, Tom Holland's Peter Parker, and at the end kind of has a blank slate starting over. And the Andrew Garfield, the second Andrew Garfield movie, it's not that he has a blank slate, but it's like it feels like the world is kind of wide open for him to figure out where he fits in and what he wants to do now. And I wanted him desperately to see what that next step was going to be, and we kind of got to see it because the next step is going to a multiverse and hanging out with Tom Holland. In fact, just talking about this makes me want to go watch No Way Home again. I might do that this week. Let's see here. Byron says, should have added Japanese Spider-Man into it, the emissary of hell. I've never seen the Japanese Spider-Man. I don't know if you're talking about an anime Spider-Man or where they had a live-action Japanese version as well. But either way, I am quite interested. Let's see here. And Salazar Art Nation says, Into the Spider-Verse had tones of Japanese Spider-Man. The old Spider-Man cartoon also had the spider robot in the two-parter episode. Okay, man, you got the deep cuts. I had forgotten about this. I mean, I had forgotten about the 70s cartoon, but I mean, I don't remember many specific storylines. I mean, the main thing I remember is Spider-Man crossing over with, that was where I first heard of the X-Men, was in the Spider-Man cartoon. I think that in that one, Wolverine was Australian instead of Canadian. But that was the first place I heard of the X-Men. I remember them having the crossover with the Incredible Hulk before they launched that whole cartoon hour where it was Spider-Man on Saturday mornings first and then Incredible Hulk afterwards. So it was Spidey and his amazing friends, then Incredible Hulk. But I don't really remember a lot of the details. And it's funny because I've got Disney Plus. They probably have all of the old cartoons on there. And I'm sure they don't hold up, yet I am tempted to go check them out. So I don't know. Let's see. All right, I'm trying to remember where I left off here. I think, okay, so my goal now is to basically take these two that I've got here in front of me and just sort of duplicate the tones on this other one. So the only thing I'm concerned about is that the white is going to be of the statue on the right one is going to be too close to the values. Yeah, these two are like almost inverse of each other. Gonna be kind of a pain in the ass. I think what I'm going to need is an intermediate value. So let's say something like this. Drop this in here. This is weird. I wonder why this is not filling. Am I doing this on the wrong layer? No, it's the right layer. Oh, it's because I have this layer alpha locked, and this must be a place where I accidentally erased. So I got to turn off the alpha lock. Did I turn off the alpha lock? I did. Okay, then there's just lines above me. That's what it is. There's a line above this layer. And that's all. Let's see here. Zalzar Art Nation says, yeah, I'd love to talk more about Spider-Man in the movies. Byron says, the Spider-Man, the Japanese Spider-Man was a live-action tokusatsu show. Very fun. All right, that's worth checking out. I am not sure what tokusatsu is. I'm guessing that it's something similar to Kamen Rider and Power Rangers and that sort of thing. So it sounds worth checking out. And then Amar says Spider Friends was what I grew up on. It says my favorites as a child were the Jack Kirby Marvel superheroes motion comic animation back in the 70s. That was so cool. They used to slide the Jack Kirby drawings across the screen, and you have like the one with the Thor, and you do that, and then his hand just like they just animate a Kirby drawing. That was classic. I bet you those are still on Disney Plus somewhere. I kind of want to go back and watch because they're almost like they're cheesy, but it's animating Jack Kirby drawings. How cool is that? Let's see here. We're all in the same ballpark here. Yeah. Salsa Art Nation says, Amar, you're about my age then. Spider Friends was what I was watching first as a kid. Yeah, we're all in the same vicinity. Let's see here. All right, so we are at a little over an hour here. I'm not going to get to the point in this stream where I'm going to have it all finished so that you guys can give me your votes, your opinions, your thoughts. But I should have this ready sometime over the course of this week, and I will post on all the social medias. So if you're following me on Instagram, you're following me on Facebook, Twitter, on the community tab on this YouTube channel, and you guys will be able to vote for which version you think I should do for the final piece. And I'm going to ask everybody pick one. But that said, in the picking of the one, I'm still probably going to only I still am probably going to do 2 versions, no more than that. But I will. I find that the problem I get, what made it really difficult, is that a lot of people would say, I think you should do this one or this other one, and I ended up with multiple choices, and it was hard to decide. It makes it that much harder when people are picking more than one, because then each person that votes, I'm giving them 2 votes. And I'd really rather people just keep it to 1 vote. What I might do is just say, if somebody picks more than one, I'm only going to choose whichever is the first one that they list. All right. So what I was doing here is I was creating a bridge by changing the color of the background so that I could change her. And then I can go and change him. I'm going to have to go in there and clean that up. And now I can go and change the background to this. So it needs to be cleaned up a little bit. And I know that I could just go in and select just this, copy, I'll paste, and drag it over, and then I would have an exact duplicate. But then I would have to worry about lining it up. I've already got this really nice grid that I've got lined up. You know what, now that I think of it, screw that grid. This isn't really that well lined up. It doesn't really matter. Why did I waste all my time doing that? Instead, deselect, turn off my background color. This is what I should have done. Instead of trying to do all that half-ass shit, I should have just copied this done, I have to drag 3 fingers down to bring up the copy all menu. So if you just have it selected, you can copy and paste, but only copy and paste. Well, actually, you know what? It doesn't matter, because I realized that since I am on just one layer, it's fine if it just copies. But you can actually, if you've got multiple layers, like if I had rendering on this, I wanted to copy, then I would use the 3-fingered swipe to bring up the copy all layer. And then I just drag this on top of that. I thought I had snapping turned on. I do have snapping turned on. This is why it seems weird that it's letting me shift things up and down, because I wanted it to be perfectly aligned. All right, then just deselect and merge with that layer. And now I've got 2 of the duplicates. I could have just saved myself all the time of doing that stupid stuff. I don't know why. I get stubborn sometimes and refuse to do things in what would be the simple way. In fact, I'm going to undo this because I realize now that I did this. Undo and undo and undo and undo and undo and undo. You know what? It may not let me go all the way back to what I had before. Let's see. How far back will this let me go? Okay. So I'm just going to do this twice now. And then we're done. Let's see here. Yeah, Amar says that this classic cartoon Ziv was funny now, but it was cool back then. Salazar says, I'll send you the sketchbook PDF. If you like, I can add a Jeremy quote on the back to entice all the burly heads. Please do. Definitely. I think you have my email, Frank, and if not, just message me. You know what? You can just leave a comment on here, and then I'll email you, and you can send it to me that way, and we'll work it out. We'll work it out. Or actually, on my website, the way that I have my email set up on my website, if you email me on my website, it's a submit box. You can't send attachments, but then I can just reply back to you from my actual regular email, and then you can send it to me however it's easiest for you to send it. Anyways, I am going to do a quick copy paste on these 2, and then we're going to call it a day. And I'll keep working on these, and I will get your guys' feedback when it's done. Hang on a sec. Turn that background layer off. Copy paste. This is what I should have done in the first place, was just move this down here. Merge that. Look at this. What I've spent the last 20 minutes doing, I could have just, because I think I get so caught up in thinking like an illustrator when I'm in Procreate that I forget that I have all of this experience as a graphic designer. And I'm like, as a designer, you just cut this, move it over and be done with it. And I don't know why I felt the need to fill all those in bit by bit. This is the point of using digital. And the point of me doing all this and having the duplicates here so that this set here that's side by side, that's exactly the same, I can use these 2 to do directional lighting study. So on this specific set here, I'm going to experiment with lighting from the viewer's point of view versus lighting from above. And then meanwhile, I'll continue experimenting with value studies on this one over here down on the right. So that is basically where we're at for today. And Martin's in the chat. Hey, 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 what up? He said, better late than never. We are just getting ready to sign off, man. But you know what? That's good, because I sign off, I wrap it up, then you can throw that replay on. You know, so it's unfortunate that you're just catching the tail end, but this way you can watch the whole thing at your leisure. Just to give you a quick rundown, I've just been sketching like hella value studies. So that is where that piece is. All right, everybody. So on that note, again, if you would like to get bonus live streams twice a month, and as a matter of fact, one of those bonus live streams is coming up this Tuesday. This Tuesday, we have what we call Art Book Study Group, where we dig into some of the best art books around, try to suck out all the knowledge we can. We've been doing a long, ongoing series on Walt Reed's The Figure, so we'll be continuing with that. As opposed to the normal hour-long or so sessions we have here, these are like 2.5, 3-hour-long sessions. So if you want to get access to that, head on over to patreon.com/Jeremy and become a subscriber. For as little as $2 a month, you get access to the Art Book Study Group live streams. There's a massive backlog, back archive of like, I don't know, 100, 200 videos at this point, studying from Walt Reed, studying from George Bridgman, studying from Ken Holtgren doing animal drawings. You get access to all of those. You can read my comic books online on our digital archive. You get access to our Patreon exclusive Discord server where we share artwork, give each other feedback, critiques, share more thoughts, knowledge, things we find on the internet. Fun place to definitely stop by, check in, hang out. For as little as $2 a month, you can find links to that in the description of the video. If you would like to get the aforementioned digital sketchbook that we talked about, and hey, you heard it from Frank first. Art Salazar Nation says it's a great sketchbook. Gave him an idea to do his own, which I'm looking forward to checking out. Head on over to newsletter.jeremy.net. You will get that free digital sketchbook when you sign up. The newsletter itself is a free monthly newsletter I send out, and it has work in progress animated GIFs, news and notes on what I'm reading, watching, what's inspiring me creatively, all of that. Links in the description for the video. And if you would like to purchase physical copies of my books, or if you read digitally, you can pick it up for Kindle or Comixology. You can pick up books like my first graphic novel, Eye of the Gods, a psychological thriller about a man cursed with visions he cannot control. You can also pick up my most recent project, Morning Star. It's Lucifer's Fall from Heaven, told as a Western. Volume 1 contains issues 1 through 4. Volume 2 contains issues 5 through 8. Both volumes have extensive back matter, character sketches, designs, page layouts, script excerpts, and more. I show you how I use reference in the books. Check out all of that at amazon.jeremy.net. That's GERIMI. There's links in the description. Unless if you're watching on Twitch, you can check those out on the description in the follow the link that's in the bio for my Twitch page. So, okay, everybody, thank you so much for the great conversation, for hanging out. Always great conversation. I appreciate you guys so much. You guys are so much fun. That's it for now. Go be creative.